a missile hit their building and it killed his 3 sons. And he survived with 6 other children. They fled to Lebanon. They moved into this refugee camp. They live in a 10-by-10 tent. A month after they got there, the entire refugee camp burned to the ground and they lost everything again. And you sit with a father who's weeping for the life that was destroyed, and you have a hard time feeling like we need to ban these people from coming to our country. We need to, you just see their humanity. And you know, we've seen this when the AIDS pandemic was raging through Africa 15 years ago. It was telling people the stories of the victims of HIV and AIDS and what it was doing to children, what it was doing to families. And so I think one of the critical things we have to communicate always is the humanity of these are not issues, they're human beings. So when you label a whole group of people and you call them illegal immigrants, or you call them refugees, or you call them the Rohingya, the minute you label them, you diminish them. You somehow put them together as a group. It's the oldest trick of the human race. And you begin to discriminate. You begin to stereotype them. You begin to put them in a neat little package that you don't have to deal with, and you can assign characteristics to them. And you can treat them as a group that illegal immigrants are a problem in the United States. The homeless are a problem. Well, you've labeled them. You fail to see their individual humanity. And I think leaders, especially in our sectors, we have to build this common understanding of humanity, that a Muslim is a human being, and a Muslim family, they're trying to raise their children just the same as a Christian family is or an atheist family is. And if we can see each other's humanity, we can start to get past the rhetoric and past the discrimination and the alienation that I think so much characterizes the world right now.
So we have, I mean, clearly a amazing leader who herself was a refugee and came into this country as a refugee. So this labeling is kind of a misnomer, right? I mean, as you're talking about, I mean, you know, what does a refugee mean? But Annamarie, talk a little bit about how as an institution, your faculty and students, what are their stories about leadership and how they are helping change the world?
Well, you know, I think that in so many ways, you know, universities, our university is kind of a microcosm of society. You know, I think you were absolutely, as you know, as someone that studied stereotyping, you're absolutely, I mean, right on the head that what we do to be able to do the them is we dehumanize them. And I think that part of what, it's very hard to be in a university like ours and not realize that them is us and us is them. Right now of our, you know, we have, you know, 3 presidents of our universities, one in Seattle, one in Bothell, one in Tacoma. They're all students of color. 2 of them are Muslims. These are our students' leaders that were elected by our students. And, you know, it says something about who we are. They represent us because they are us. And that is the kind of environment that we want to create for our students. And the fact that these are elected leaders says that we have a whole lot more to do, but that we're doing some things right. You know, it's very interesting to me. Sometimes when I'm, you know, traveling the state, you know, people will say, well, you know, I go to your campus and there's all these international Chinese students. I say, probably that might have been the 3rd or 4th generation Chinese students whose, you know, great-grandparents came here to build the railroads.
Right.
And, you know, and some of them are international students, and they bring an incredible amount of richness. And I don't just mean in terms of tuition dollars, but real richness to our campus, because it is part of the preparing them to be, you know, global citizens. One of the things that, it's an initiative that, excuse me, that I launched when I was actually still in the interim position, was a race and equity initiative. And part of that, and you know, at times it can be criticized as being all talk, but I think talk is important because I think that one of the things that sometimes happen is we're surrounded by difference, but we don't actually talk to each other across differences so that we can learn from each other. And some of what we've been finding in this initiative is that sometimes we need to talk within ourselves. So we've had groups that are all fraternity and sorority kids talking about issues around race. And actually at the end of that series of dialogues, they decided on their own that every single fraternity and sorority on our campus has a chief diversity officer that the fraternity and sorority pays for themselves because they realized that they needed that. Some conversations are across groups where we have very different groups of students coming together. I mean, we don't have the answers. We have a long way to go. We still have all the tensions on our campus, I'd like to think in smaller scale than what we have in society. But I think we're trying to talk across that divide because that's exactly what it's all about, is looking at each other and seeing humanity. Trying to see the world less in terms of the only way I can win is for you to lose, but that the way to win is to, Eric Liu, who has talked on our campus numerous times, one of the things I love about what he says, and I repeat it shamelessly and sometimes don't even give him credit, is that notion of we're all better off when we're all better off. And how can we start actually thinking about the world that way?
So John, you're now in a very different role than what you have been customarily used to, being part of Microsoft economic engine. And now you've kind of moved over to Starbucks, and your role is, as Howard Schultz pointed to your chest and said, what are you going to do about this? So what is Starbucks doing? And what are some of these amazing initiatives that you have, and how do you kind of bring that to life?
Well, first of all, you're right. It's a very different role. You should know you inspired me as a new employee at Microsoft. I was not working in community affairs, but I learned a lot watching you and your team, and it inspired our work today in social impact at Starbucks. We're guided by a rather profound but simple question, which, whether you are a Seattle liberal progressive like our chairman, or whether you're more libertarian like a lot of us at Microsoft. And the question is this: what is the role and responsibility of a for-profit company? And the answer to that question, at a time when government has failed, oh, I see they have a slide, thank you. I brought a slide, but we don't need to use the slide, so thank you. And the answer, at a time when government is largely dysfunctional and a loss of trust in institutions, could have profound consequences. We believe that there is a role and responsibility for companies, particularly when it comes to creating opportunities. When you have 5 million opportunity youth in the United States between the age of 16 and 24 who are out of school and out of work, and largely viewed by corporate America as somebody else's problem, the government's problem, not hireable, not job ready, not job skilled. Howard Schultz was an opportunity youth one day back in New York. He grew up in really tough circumstances. So he identifies with this population and views them as not somebody else's problem, but our opportunity. So we started a coalition to hire 1 million of the 5 million over a 5-year period. We're already close to 250,000 after 3 years with our coalition, and Starbucks alone has hired 50,000. And why? It's not charity. It's good for business. These opportunity youth, when given the opportunity to have benefits, to have access to higher education benefits, comprehensive health insurance, stock equity, they will outperform, and we're showing that they can. So we're trying to change corporate America's view of that population, and in so doing, giving them a voice. The same thing with 2.5 million transitioning veterans and military spouses. An amazing cultural divide, frankly, especially here in Seattle. We're surrounded by these military bases, but how many of us have been on there? How many of us actually know a lot of people in the military? Massive cultural divide. We leaned into that population and set out to hire 10,000 over a 5-year period. We hired 10,000 in 3 years because they too, and their spouses, demonstrated that they are good for business. Their sense of service, their sense of commitment, they have helped us bridge that cultural divide. And lastly, when our country rolled up the welcome mat to refugees, we took a different approach. we believe that a job offer is one of the most important and perhaps profound way of both asking for and giving value to a human being. A job says, I trust you, I need you, and in so I will have a partnership, a contract with you. And so we said, and we had been thinking about it, the timing happened to coincide with some other things that were being announced, but we announced last January that we were going to actually hire 10,000 refugees around the world. And again, this is what, after we've learned from our Opportunity Youth Hiring Initiative, our Veterans and Military Spouse Hiring Initiative, we know how to do this. And it takes a lot of work, it takes time to do it right. And again, we're not doing it at a charity, we're doing it because we know, and you know, that refugees, their resilience, their experience, provide extraordinary cultural and skilled opportunities for us as a major service provider of a service industry. And we're also demonstrating that. We're going to take our time, but that is how we believe we can have the biggest impact and also demonstrate that it is good for business. And we think we can show other corporations, and we're starting to. Chobani, Albertsons, and others have led the way in hiring refugees. We're following them and learning from them. We're trying to do it at scale. And frankly, we need help. We need partners. The resettlement agencies and others have been great. But that is the answer, frankly, to our question in terms of what is the role and responsibility of a company. It is creating opportunities and giving a voice by giving a job.
One thing that I'll add that I think is critical in all this is the whole notion of